Taos internet on our live stream on YouTube or Facebook. I did shave, although I do have bags under my eyes, and I assure you the jet lag is a very, very real thing. We're not headed to Indianapolis this week. I am going to take a few days off from the Combine. I did bring my NFL Films pen with me, and I've also brought with me NFL analyst from Bleacher Report. We get out to the great state of Ohio. He is headed to Indianapolis a little later on in the week for the Combine. Brent Sobleski is one of our defending champions around here. Dude, I have not spoken to you, I don't think, since the Atlanta Falcons. Hey, dude, the last month's been crazy, right? I go to Houston. We do the Super Bowl. I've been in Australia the last couple weeks. I'm still coming to grips with the facts that the Patriots actually won a championship again, man. It's crazy.
Well, first of all, hello, Nestor. I'm glad to hear you had a wonderful trip. Some of us are jealous on the other end here.
Well, that's why I post the pictures so you can enjoy them too. It's not about envy or jealousy. It's about sharing. The little button on Facebook says share.
That. Especially with, I know all the poisonous snakes and spiders and not just, so I'll just avoid that and just enjoy the pictures.
I saw a lot of spiders, bro. Trust me, man.
When we look at the Super Bowl, and it's still surprising to even mention it a couple months out, or about a little over a month out, that the Patriots were able to come back from that contest. And what I found so surprising about it, and I know the conversation and the narrative after the game was greatest Super Bowl ever or just great Super Bowl. I tend to lean towards actually the greatest, and the argument stands. The argument stands where, well, the first half wasn't very good, but I can contend that what happened in those first two quarters set up everything that we saw late in that contest. And I know that sounds a little obvious, but what I mean by that is the game within the game. What I saw was a New England Patriots offense was still moving the ball, but they had to make adjustments to really counteract the Falcons' play, their enthusiasm flying to the ball. And I think the biggest stat we saw was the fact that Patriots ran 99 offensive plays in that contest compared to Atlanta's 49. So when you see that they went up-tempo, when you saw that they were getting the ball out of Tom Brady's hands, it led to everything towards the end of that contest. And really, it's that what made it fascinating to me, seeing how a great chess player like Bill Belichick can even overcome such amazing odds to still pull it out with Tom Brady and win another championship. So Nestor, that's why I stand back, and I just really enjoyed the game to see from that angle, to see all the little punches and counter punches throughout the entire contest.
Well, for everybody in Baltimore, we got the night sweats, right? Because we remember when the lights went out down in New Orleans 4 years ago. There too could have been us, right? I mean, how the Atlanta Falcons feel right now is how the Ravens. Look, the 49ers and Harbaugh, and we'll get to that mess in a minute at the top of the draft because that's still lingering 4 years later. But I can't imagine what Dan Quinn and what the Falcons, what Matt Ryan, what that whole franchise, Arthur Blank, everybody is going to have to overcome to ever get back to that point now. And the Ravens almost blew the Super Bowl 4 years ago, but I don't know how the Falcons, even a month later, they wake up, they're out at the Combine right now looking at football players. That's got to be a very, very bitter pill, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon for that franchise.
It's something you should worry about as an organization because you don't want it tearing apart a very good locker room. When you look at the way their roster is comprised, this is a team that should be able to compete for not just one Super Bowl, multiple Super Bowls over the next few years. They're very young. They have drafted exceptionally well, especially in the last 2 years. Their defense is young and athletic and exciting, and it's only going to get better. And then you still have Matt Ryan. You have the pieces at running back, Julio Jones. This is a team that can compete for multiple years as long as they don't let that loss fester. And I know that's easier said than done, especially in that situation, considering what was at stake. But
well, how would the 49ers have been different as an organization if they would have gotten 1 yard with Frank Gore 4 years later? Would Jim Harbaugh still be there? Maybe, probably.
So.
I mean, they certainly would have given him enough money. They would have a pelt on the wall, and how different would the Ravens have been? Having not made the playoffs 3 out of the last 4 years now, and no Ray Lewis and no Ed Reed, and, all of Flacco's transgressions, he still has a pelt on the wall. It really is a fascinating study for these organizations. What happens after that thing goes wrong? And for the Patriots, that thing's gone wrong a couple of times. David Tyree and Manningham, right? I mean, and they still are here punching. There's something to be said for that. Look, I don't like Belichick and Brady. I think they're cheaters. I think they're whiners. I think they work the edge of everything they do. But all that being said, they're resilient MFers. I'll tell you that. They really are.
The thing, I remember a conversation as you were talking about, we don't get to see the other side. And I had a conversation, I believe it was last summer, with Mike Minter, the former safety for the Carolina Panthers. And obviously the Carolina Panthers were the team that lost the second Super Bowl to the New England Patriots with another great kick at the end of the game. But Mike Minter, at the end of that contest, made that huge hit on Deion Branch, and Branch held on to the ball. And what he told me is what fans don't realize, what those of us on the outside don't realize, is when you lose, you're nothing. And I don't mean that in a sense that, yes, they're the losers, they didn't win the championship. Literally, they're pushing you off the field because you don't matter anymore. And you go to the locker room, and all you do is just sit there and think and replay every single little possibility in your mind of what went wrong and how you could have changed it. And it haunts you. And he stated that outright. Now he's a successful coach, head coach at Campbell University, the Fighting Camels, go Camels. It's a situation where all of us have to understand that these are individuals. We're not playing Madden and you can restart your franchise and see if you can win the following year. These are men that put their lives on, not necessarily on the line literally, but figuratively, and how that it can be effective long term. And that's what's going to be fascinating, because we saw what happened with Carolina. We saw how that team imploded. That was a very talented team as well, and they just were not the same coming into this year compared to the swagger they had in 2015. So that's what I'm very interested to see moving forward, because I look at Atlanta and I think to myself, they're going to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years if they can get past this. And that's hard to say, because as someone that lives here in Ohio, and we've mentioned it multiple times, Nestor, the Cleveland Browns no longer have the worst loss of all time. It's now the Atlanta Falcons. But we remember what happened to those Browns teams in the mid-'80s that could never get over the hump and had heartbreaking losses to John Elway. They were never the same. So let's see what happens with the Falcons.
All right, well, we speak about the NFL draft and the Combine this week. Brent Sobleski joining us here for Bleacher Report. Of course, NFL analyst and writer there. You can follow his journey out on Twitter as well at Brent Sobleski. You talk about the Cleveland Browns. Well, they're going to hold some cards here in the draft. Now, thoughts about this draft and thoughts about quarterbacks, because this is the 7 or 8 week conversation we're going to have between now and Philadelphia. We're going to say, all right, the quarterbacks will affect everything at the top of this draft. Where are the quarterbacks? And Lord knows those teams at the top, they need a quarterback. My question is, where does Jay Cutler go? Where does RG3 go? Where does Kaepernick go? Tyrod Taylor, these guys that are sort of 1 foot out, 1 foot in as far as quarterbacking, because over the next 6 weeks, everyone's going to get their quarterback. They're going to get their starting quarterback for next year. And we all know that, look, Houston and Denver went through this last year after winning a championship. The Denver Broncos couldn't figure it out. Houston couldn't figure it out. They spent a lot of money on it. And you got the Kirk Cousins situation in Washington. The quarterback thing, it's all interlocking because no one can have two, right?
Well, let me disagree with one point you stated, Nestor. I do not believe that the quarterbacks will affect the top of this year's draft. At least not the number one. At least not the number one overall.
I'm going to come back and play that back to you in 8 weeks, because every year at the Combine, I hear that there's some lineman, there's some linebacker, there's some sack master, there's some left tackle, there's some guy who's going to have a bong mask on at 6:55 on draft night. That's going to affect the whole thing, and it always does come back to the quarterbacks, right? I mean, because in the end, you're only going to keep your job if you can find a quarterback. If you're running the Browns or the 49ers or the Bears, right?
Yes, obviously it does, and I'm not arguing that point. My contention is simple. When you look at Myles Garrett, the defensive end from Texas A&M, I believe he's one of the best 5 or 6 defensive prospects I've graded since I've started covering the NFL draft 15 years ago. This is how highly I regard him. If I look at any of those players over that time, really the only one I can see was clearly better from a defensive perspective was Ndamukong Suh, because he was so dominant overall. We can name other offensive players of similar caliber, like a Calvin Johnson or even Eli Manning as a quarterback. Looking at them purely as prospects, not necessarily what they became coming into the league. Myles Garrett is an exceptional talent. If you ask anyone around the league, it's pretty much consensus. He's the number one prospect, 6'5", 270-pound pass rushers, 4.4, 4.5 speed, explosion, flexibility, everything you want in that position. He's not a consolation prize because there's not a quarterback, quote unquote, the franchise type prospect. And that plays into the other part of this equation. When you look at these quarterbacks, and I know we all have memories of Deshaun Watson raising the trophy against Alabama, and you have this Deshaun Kaiser, 6'4", 230 pounds from Notre Dame, Patrick Mahomes out of Texas Tech. Great kid, great athleticism, huge arm, and the son of Pat Mahomes, who played 11 years in Major League Baseball. You see these talents. You look at these young men. Not even mention North Carolina's Mitch Trubisky, who may be the top quarterback prospect. But what you also don't see is long-term development. And I mean that at the collegiate level. They're all underclassmen. They're all 22 or 21 years old. They have a lot to learn in how to play the position. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron when it comes to quarterback, because that's always the case, but they're not necessarily coming out of the pro-style systems, understanding the passing concepts or even the verbiage that comes down to playing the position. And we know when it comes to quarterback, it's so reliant, not just on your physical tools, but how you play the game from the shoulders up. And that's the concerns with all these young men. So if you can't guarantee me you're going to have a guy that can come in with the number one overall pick and be a starting quarterback and have that type of impact on your roster, I don't see why you would bypass on a talent like Myles Garrett just because the quarterback's more valuable overall, even if the talent isn't quite to the same level.
He is Brent Sobleski at Bleacher Report. You can follow his journey out there at Bleacher Report as well as out on Twitter. And he gets into the comic world every once in a while as well. So if you're a comics fan, you'll have something in common with Brent as well. For the Ravens going into this thing, and, here's – I got off a plane from Australia flying 14 hours from Sydney to L.A. I land in L.A. My own text service goes on. When I turn my phone on for the first time in 17 days, my wife hands me the phone and says, here, Matt Elam, former first-round pick, a guy who barely got onto the field for the Ravens. If you want to wonder why the Ravens have struggled the last 4 years, look no further than guys like Matt Elam and decisions to bring in people like Matt Elam who don't get on the field, don't contribute, and that's how you wind up not making the playoffs 3 out of 4 years. For the Ravens, they're in a very, very tenuous spot right now. We don't hear much about Pittsburgh being on the hot seat or New England. There's some places where there has been incredible stability in this league, but no one's had more stability than Baltimore other than the Patriots, and no one's ever made a draft pick for the Ravens other than Ozzie Newsome. The pitchforks are out, words of the owner, by the way. This is the most important 8 weeks for the Ravens over the next 5 to 10 years here as to what direction this franchise is going to go in. Because if they don't get it right, and if they go 6-10 or 5-11 next year, I have a feeling we could go nuclear here, and we could have a whole different program going on 12 months from now, which every year I go to the Combine, the 49ers, the Jaguars, the Titans, the Browns, you go through the list. All these teams always have somebody else making those decisions. The Buccaneers, I can't, the Bills, the Saints, have the same coaching staff, but they're also one of those teams. Every year this time we're talking about, are they going to mix it up? Are they going to change it up? With the Ravens, these next 8 weeks and these free agent decisions they make and who they pick in Philadelphia 7 weeks from now, this is going to shape the next 3 to 5 years, because it's either going to keep guys' jobs or we're going to have major changes around here.
Well, I find interesting, Nestor, and I'm looking at this micro from the draft itself and where they stand. You're at the 16th overall pick, so you're not necessarily in that top prospect range where you get the quote-unquote elite guys. And yet, you're maybe in that next wave, right at the precipice of where a potential difference maker could fall right into your laps. And now you're at the mercy of those teams in front of you. And we've seen Ozzie, and maybe some of it's relying just on his reputation, because anyone who's in and around the league, or those of us who cover him, respect him and what he does to the utmost degree. But you don't always get it right, and you pointed it out spectacularly in some of the examples you provided of how the Ravens have blundered in recent years. They need to get back to the point where they're sitting at 16th overall pick, and even though they may not be in position to grab what's a prospect that's deemed an impact player, they still find a way to do so. And I put out a mock draft early this week, and one of the things I sat there and I looked at was what positions can create the most impact for them, and where can they improve to become the team that we've known throughout the past decade. And one of the first things I looked at was pass rusher. This year's class, as I mentioned just a bit ago, isn't littered with your top-flight quarterback prospects. You have a couple nice running backs, but this is a defensive draft, and you have so much talent on edge defenders, pass rushers, safeties, and cornerbacks that this is a time to take what is already a strength with the Ravens and solidify it to further degrees. Now, you have Terrell Suggs, for example, and you have Elvis Dumervil, both aging, both injured, recent injury.
Yeah, I'm not sure Dumerville's going to be a part of this thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
My point was that you can't rely on them for too much longer. So if you're in a position at 16, and I'm just giving you an example, if a Derek Barnett from Tennessee falls to you, who's being compared favorably to Terrell Suggs in recent weeks because he's not a sensational athlete, but he's a fantastic pass rusher. And as Ozzie said, if we've seen you do it at college, we expect you to do it in the NFL. So a player like that you can take a little bit of a chance on, because if he pans out, it can be a monster impact at a premium position. You have to take that chance. They've taken those chances previously, and they've worked out. In recent years, not as much. So right now, you are at the precipice of either sticking at mediocrity or worse, or trying to get back over the hump and become a legitimate contender into the AFC North, which is going to be difficult because the Steelers are still very good. The Bengals aren't going to be as bad as they were this past year due to injuries and numerous other reasons. So you have at least Flacco in place for the next multiple years. That's more than about half the teams can say in the NFL. I know he's not always the most favored person in Baltimore, but you have that position solidified. You add to the running game. You not necessarily fix your offensive line, but you have decisions to make with Ricky Wagner coming up on free agency. Wide receiver, you need to add a little bit more, hoping Perryman can continue to develop. Tight end, you have plenty of talent. Get that defense and put it to where it should be, and we've all grown accustomed to it being. Add more talent, add youth, athleticism, and guys that fly the football. And that's Ravens football. And if you do so, I think you can return to where you were instead of where you're currently at.
Brent Sobleski covers all things NFL and Combine this week out in Indianapolis. You can follow his journey out of Bleacher Report as well as at Brent Sobleski on Twitter. For the quarterbacks, and we talked about this, teams over the next 6 weeks have to decide, are we going to get someone in the draft we're going to work with? Or are we going to go resurrect Jay Cutler again? Are we going to go take somebody else's problem? And then there's the Garoppolo thing. Someone is going to, quote-unquote, lock up their future in the same way that, let's say, Kansas City did with Matt Castle, in the same way that Houston did with Matt Schaub. Someone's going to deal with the Patriots and do a deal with the devil there and grab Garoppolo and say, we've got our quarterback. We saw that with Osweiler last year. This is a dodgy business even for the veteran quarterbacks. Even for the guys, as you've pointed out, you could say, well, I got a little bit of tape on him from weeks 1 through 3. He looked like an NFL quarterback. Yeah, maybe in the Patriots system he did. Put him behind the Jaguars line. Let's see how he does.
Again, Nestor, I look at it, I believe Jimmy Garoppolo, for example, since he's the example we've provided, is the best option for any quarterback-needy team on the market. Now, he may be the most expensive when you consider how much you'll have to trade plus a new contract since he's a free agent after next season. But I look at him, and even that small sample size, we saw a completely different quarterback. Now, you have to go back to when he was in Eastern Illinois at the FCS level, throwing for 5,000 yards for the Panthers, going into the playoffs and losing in the big snow game against Townsend. But what he was an air raid system quarterback in college, and what we saw in Jimmy Garoppolo in that small sample size, and I won't deny it is a small sample size, is a young quarterback completely comfortable in a complicated system as a New England Patriots. Yes, it's a quarterback-friendly system, but what you also see him at the line of scrimmage making pre-snap reads, checks into different not only blocking schemes but plays and taking advantage of defenses, in which that is a process that takes time at the NFL, and you could see that he was getting it. And when you can invest in that type of player without having to develop him to that point, I think you have an added advantage. Now, there's other options. I think Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo is very intriguing. This is an organization that never seemed to commit to him, and his general manager has been very vocal, even against him at times, and I've always found that surprising. I know he's not your traditional drop-back quarterback, but he's better than a lot of quarterbacks currently found in the NFL starting. Jay Cutler, you mentioned earlier, if he's released, that has to be the right situation. Maybe it's San Francisco with another Shanahan due to that history, or even a New York Jets because Jeremy Bates, the new offensive coordinator, had history only in Denver and slightly with the Bears. So you can see that roulette starting, that carousel of these names that could be moving around, because when you come down to it, and I'll say it flat out, I am not completely sold on these quarterbacks. I've studied 2 years of tape on all of them. And to me, while the potential is there, you're looking at long-term prospects. And we know in the NFL, if that's the case, you're simply developing the quarterback for the next guy and the next coach.
He is Brent Sobleski. We're going to be checking back in with him again before we get to Philadelphia 7 weeks from now. And, hey, man, you enjoying this part of the year? I mean, the free agency thing this week's going to be kind of hot as well. Going to be cuts everywhere. I know when Nick Mangold hit the street, I thought, is he a future Matt Burke for the Ravens organization? It's certainly what Alex Mack did last year. But, teams are going to be throwing some players out onto the scrap heap. Hey, the Ravens could be putting Mike Wallace and Elvis Dumervil and a whole bunch of other guys you've heard, let alone what's going to happen around here with Rick Wagner and Brandon Williams over the next couple of weeks.
This is going to be absolutely fascinating. If anyone likes the business aspect of the NFL, this might be the best offseason ever, Nestor. When you have, and I'm not misquoting, this is over $1 billion in cap space between the 32 NFL teams.
That's with a B.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of payola. I'm going to be confused in the league. Now, obviously, it's not all going to be spent, but the market, as we know it, is going to be completely reset, and we've already seen that to a degree with the Jamie Collins deal, last month, and now Antonio Brown, Monday. So you have that where there's going to be multiple positions that are going to get contracts that we haven't seen previously for their position. And we have to understand that what you think is the normal market is no longer that market.
Well, remember when Joe Flacco 4 years ago wins the Super Bowl, gets the money, everybody's pissed that he got top money, and he said it'll only last 15 minutes, somewhat, because that's the way it is, right? I mean, top dollar is only top dollar for today, and then you see Coleccio Semele last year go out and get, crazy left tackle money, and he's not a left tackle, by the way, but that's what happens when these teams have that kind of cake, and that should be the concern for Brandon Williams and Rick Wagner around here, is that they're going to be worth so much more to someone else because they have more money to spend.
Yeah, absolutely. Right time, right place, right age. And we can't completely rule that out as well. Kirk Cousins is likely going to make $24 million next year. That's more than Tom Brady. That's more than Ben Roethlisberger. That's more than Eli Manning. That's more than Phillip Rivers. So that gives you an idea exactly which way this market's going. And it's fascinating to, I know you hear people say, well, it's not a great free agent market. It's all about expectations and how you prioritize free agency in the first place. If you're trying to build your roster, like, say, the Jacksonville Jaguars did in the last 2 years, primarily through free agency, it's not going to work. And we saw them now trade away Julius Thomas, cut other players that were big-name signees like Kelvin Beachum last year. So it's a complementary piece to continuing to build through the NFL draft. Yes, you're going to overspend. That's just free agency. Every player is overpaid in free agency. Just accept it. But they shouldn't be your core pieces moving forward. That comes from the draft, developing your talent, and then signing those guys long-term.
Well, when you're the Miami Dolphins and you have to go give Ndamukong Suh that money out in the marketplace, it speaks volumes to where you've been. You've been losing a long time. If you're out buying other teams' free agents, chances are you have cap space because you've sucked for a while. And chances are you're either the coach or the decision maker there that's fresh to the situation. You weren't there when you sucked, which is the case in San Francisco right now, or in Cleveland to some degree with Hugh Jackson and that organization at the top of this draft. Hey, man, always great catching up with you, man. Always appreciate your fresh take on everything. We'll be following you out at Bleacher Report as well as out on Twitter, man. Keep the faith.
Well, thank you, Nestor. I'll talk to you later.
You got it. Brent Sobleski joining us here from the great state of Ohio. Oh, how I hate Ohio. I'll be going back soon. Cleveland, Cincinnati. It's lovely there this time of the year. Skipped Indianapolis this week. Called an audible. Usually go to the combine, but my jet lag combined with some other off-the-field issues has led us to work from home this week, which is just fine and dandy. It gives me a chance to catch up on the Terps, the Caps, the Wizards. Obviously, the Orioles are playing some spring training right now. We're going to get back to that. Luke's been blogging away on all things there, but we got you covered around here. You can find us out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Anything you miss is there for you. You can also email me anytime. I am a very available individual. Nasty at WNST.net. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We stream live on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Still have space on our London trip. You can send me an email on that. Pete will get you all taken care of for our London trip in September. We're waiting for the NFL schedule to come out in April. Also going to have trips to Green Bay, to Nashville. It's going to be a big, big year this year. Out to Oakland, as long as they're playing there and not Vegas. I think they'll be in Oakland for now, so that means margaritas for me. And also, hold March 20th, Monday, March 20th. Head coach Barry Trotz is going to be joining us up here in Baltimore for a big Rock the Red, Let's Drink from the Cup celebration. I like that the Caps made their big move on Monday night as well. We'll be talking to Ed Frankovic as well as Joe Beninati later in the week about that. Anything that you really miss here, you can always catch up on the morning newspaper. 7 a.m., it gets delivered to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there, and the tech service keeps you informed of any breaking news that happens on the WNST tech service, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home from 3 until 5. It is the SSV on WNST. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.